To localize the central sulcus, you can use a lot of tips. I mean, a lot of tips. But I'll talk about the 3 tips that I use more frequently during my routine. All those tips were described by Dr. Thomas Nadish, and to localize those tips, we're going to use an axial view. An axial view near the top of the head. Okay, so that red line represents the level of the axial view that we're looking at. So let me zoom in. Let me use another tool. So tip number 1. Tip number 1 is about the morphology of the central sulcus on most of the patients. And the morphology of the central sulcus, it looks like the Greek letter omega. And that's why that sign is called the omega sign. For tip number 2, we're going to use the superior frontal sulcus. Look at the name of the sulcus. It's the superior frontal sulcus. So it will be the most cranial frontal sulcus that is oriented in an anterior-posterior direction. And usually, it's not always, but most of the times, it will intersect the precentral sulcus. And that intersection will resemble a letter T upside down, and sometimes it may resemble a letter L. Okay, so once you have localized the precentral sulcus, you know that the next one, posterior to it, will be the central sulcus. So that was tip number 2. For the tip number 3 is the bracket sign. The bracket sign is very useful because once you have localized the bracket sign, you know that the next one in front of it will be the central sulcus. The bracket sign, it represents the pars marginalis of the cingulate sulcus, also known as the marginal sulcus. And I talk more about that sulcus in another video. Every time that I look at that sulcus, I think it looks like a mustache, so maybe we could call that a mustache sign as well. The only problem with that is that there are some authors that consider that describe the central sulcus morphology as a mustache, but I think that the bracket sign is more similar to a mustache, and obviously it depends on the style of the mustache. So those are the three tips, and once you have localized the central sulcus, you know that the gyrus in front of it will be the precentral gyrus that contains an important part of the primary motor cortex, and posterior to it you will find the postcentral gyrus that contains an important part of the primary sensory cortex.